Welcome to the Stewardship Leader podcast, brought to you by the Christian Stewardship Network. CSN exists to encourage, teach, and connect church and stewardship leaders to help them create and lead healthy stewardship ministries in their church. You can learn more about CSN at ChristianStewardshipNetwork.com. Well, hey everyone, welcome to Stewardship Leader. I'm your host, Leo Sabo, and today I have Courtney Markley again with us, and we're going to talk about understanding the psychology of money. And this is the second episode in our series on financial coaching, why it's important, how to do it successfully. Courtney, welcome back to the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's always a great time to be talking to you, Leo.
Let's start with, we were talking just before we got started today, we were talking about the fact that when you started coaching practice, you began noticing client patterns regarding the behaviors that caused you to dramatically change the way you did coaching. So you were learning, you were seeing some feedback. Tell us about that. What exactly was happening and how did you process through it?
Yes, thank you so much. So we mentioned this at the last episode, but because I do this for a living, I was kind of forced to figure some things out if I wanted to survive in this space, if I wanted to keep going and serve people really well. And when I first started my coaching practice, even though I had done it at our church for a while, there was still this moment of, well, okay, now people are paying me. The pressure's kind of on now, and I want to make sure I'm showing up really well for people. And gosh, do I really know what I'm doing? There's like all of these things, coming in my mind. And at first it was, well, yeah, Courtney, you get the math. You're doing this in your own life, with your own family. You can show other people how to do the math too. Like, it's not that hard. And so I would sit down with someone in the very first session. I would say, give me your budget. Let's go over your numbers. And I would say, okay, here's your problems. Let me figure out this math problem for you. Okay, here's your budget back. It's perfect. It's beautiful. I'm so proud of my new budget baby that I created. Here's this gift for you. You're welcome. Your life will go so smoothly if you just stick with this plan now.
Yeah.
And so then we'd meet the next time and it's like, all right, Leo, did you stick to your budget plan? How's that going? And they'd be like, no, I'm actually not doing it at all. In fact, I might be worse than the last time that we met. And I'm like, what? The math works. I showed you that the math works. Why aren't you doing it? Come on. That's right. And I'm sure, knowing what I know about you, I'm sure your brain kind of works that way too, a little bit of
oh yeah.
Math
I mean,
works.
you're speaking exactly what I did. So
Yes.
I totally resemble those remarks.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so after trying that for a while and completely failing and falling on my face, most of the people, my first few clients, God bless them, totally ghosted me after the first session, right? And I don't blame them. They probably never want to hear from me ever again. And I don't blame them at all. But it was one of those, okay, I'm leading with the math and the budget because people are coming to me saying they want to learn how to budget, but maybe that's not actually what they'd want. Right. Mm-hmm. So there was this moment of, how do I get under what they really want? And that's when I started leaning into more of the psychology and the behaviors of it all. And I think about it very similar to health. We were actually just talking about healthy eating a moment ago. You could tell me, Leo, all right, Courtney, if you just ate fruits and vegetables and stuck to this diet plan, you would lose X amount of weight. And these are all the health benefits and your life would go so much better. And I would say, that sounds like a great plan, Leo. And then I would go back and eat my cookie, right? That's kind of how I'm wired. Because we have these deeper psychological behavioral patterns, right? And there's emotion and nuance involved. And so I kind of had to come to terms with, people are not math problems. People are not problems to be solved or fixed. But it was more of how do I get really underneath to what the true problem really is? So once I started to make that shift, then I started to really dive in deeper and learn more about psychology and try to figure out, okay, what does drive people's decisions when it comes to their money? What is driving their overall behaviors? And how do I get under that to help them actually make change. Because after doing this a long time, I'm a big advocate for math does not change people. It just doesn't. It's not going to work for most people unless you happen to have a very like process-driven person in front of you. I've coached a few engineers and they tend to get that language. But if you're not, if you're talking to the other like 95% of the population,
or the spouse of the engineer, right?
Or the spouse. Oh, yes, exactly. Because they're just like rolling their eyes.
What are you guys talking about, right?
Yes, exactly. So if you're talking to the majority of the population, we make decisions based on emotions, based on our feelings. And so how do we start to get under that and start to really unpack that so that people will actually execute their budget and their financial plan, and they'll want to do it. So that's what I normally find, Leo, is when someone comes to me and asks, like, can you teach me how to budget? What they're actually asking is, can you teach me to want to budget? Because I don't want to do it. There's something that's stopping me from wanting to do it. And that's what we get under.
Yeah, that's so profound right there. It's not about helping me to budget, help me to want to budget. That's really, really good, because they're not going to emphasize that. They're not going to say it that way, but really that's what they're saying. They're not saying, hey, I failed 3rd and 4th grade math. I've been struggling to do this all my life because I don't know how to do math. They're not saying that. What they're saying is, I don't understand this. Really what they're saying is, I don't want to do this. This looks constricting. This looks not fun. Yeah, it's the last thing I want to do, but I'm like forced to do something because everything's broken and I'm trying to fix that. So maybe you can give me your special math that can help me fix this. Exactly. And then they find out we don't have special math. It's the same math you have, because it's not a math issue. But I love that. I love that it is not about the actual plan itself. And as you said, when you focus on that, and this is important for those who do financial coaching, to realize that people do want to know and have the knowledge and the advice on how to do it well. That's definitely a component of it. We cannot minimize that. But that does not come first. That comes down the line at some point when they are willing. Then they're like, okay, now I'm ready. Show me how. Mm-hmm. And that's such an important part of it. All right. So what are the major psychological factors that determine how someone thinks about money? Let's dig into that. And if you can, give us some examples from past clients.
Yes, absolutely. There's a good book out there, The Psychology of Money, that will break this down. It's not a faith-based book, but we can read it and certainly, pluck out some things that we can use, right?
Sure.
So the 6 key factors, and I have certainly seen this to be true. They come up in pretty much every single conversation that I have with people about money. The things that form our money mindset. It's essentially, if you've ever wondered, like, why do people have such varying views and opinions about money? It's because of these 6 things. We all have these 6 things and they all come together differently. So it is your childhood, right? So talking about your parents or the guardians who raised you and your childhood experiences, your income level, the generation you were born. There's actually studies, Leo, that have shown that the year that you were born, if it was a time during economic flourishing, then you're more likely to have an abundance mindset. Versus if you were born in a year where the economy was down, you may have unknowingly picked up on this scarcity mentality.
Yeah.
Your values and beliefs, your personal experiences, and your cultural background. So these 6 components come together to form a person's money mindset. And just to give you a few examples, let's talk about personal experiences, because this is one that in childhood I find tend to be the most dominant. So when I'm talking to someone, even potentially in the consultation or the first session, I'm starting to ask them what money was like for them in childhood and what are some of their major personal experiences and memories revolving money. I'll never forget, I was in a consultation with this couple and I was looking in the eyes of this like big burly man. He was a former Marine and he's like tough dude, right? Like he's total tough guy. And he and his wife, very loving relationship, but they had very different money mindsets, just very different views on how they thought about money. She loved to spend money And he had this natural tendency to like hoard and tighten. And I'm like physically doing it with my body because like this is almost like the stance that he was in, right? It's like I'm just hanging on for dear life for this money, right? And so I started to ask him because they were, again, their income was actually really good. They both had great jobs. Family was healthy. They didn't have any like major issues that he would need to be worried about. But he had this, I need to hang on to my money. So we started to unpack potentially where that came from originally. What were some of his big life experiences growing up when it came to money? And he started to share this story about how he was in middle school or maybe early high school during the '08 crash. Okay. Both of his parents owned businesses in real estate. So he went from living a very, very comfortable lifestyle where mom and dad's businesses are thriving and life is really, really good to, oh shoot, all of that was built on debt. And now the real estate market is crashing and everything's going down. And now actually mom and dad don't have food and they don't have gas. And I saw this big, burly, tough man begin to just break down and cry and share in front of me and his wife, I think for the first time, that as a kid, he would go out and he would steal gas and put in mom and dad's car. And he would steal bread so that his family could eat. That moment in time for him was a really, really big deal. And it completely changed how we looked at money. And so that's one example of how a personal experience can dramatically affect how someone behaves and thinks about money.
Yeah. That's very powerful. I mean, when you think about psychologically and emotionally how that affected him and how he saw the situation and tried to fix it, and you can understand why he is holding on to it as hard as he is. Because because he had to suffer through losing that. And I've experienced the same thing with coaching in different situations where it's usually a husband and wife situation when one is on one end, one is on, they're both on the extreme ends. And usually it's their upbringing. It's how they, especially if they're younger. I met a couple recently that they're younger themselves. And so it's like you don't have enough life experience to really have like major financial catastrophe, but yet where you guys are at as far as your positions on this is so opposite, and it's hard to come together and talk about this openly because you're both holding on to your own way, and you're thinking, there's no way I can let go of this. This is dangerous. If I let go of this, my life will change in a bad way, right? I can't buy what I want, or I can't have the security that I want. And so it's so powerful, so important to understand that. Any other examples that you can use to show the psychological factors that determine that? Maybe dig into another one of these 6.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like, I could share for days. But one that comes to just top of mind, let's dive into childhood a bit. Every parent hopes to instill good lessons into their children, right? And sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't, and that's okay. But I was coaching this gentleman. Again, he made pretty good income. He was an entrepreneur, owned his own business, but his finances were just a wreck, unfortunately. And essentially what he was doing was whenever money came in, he immediately spent it again. Like it almost didn't even touch his account, right? That's how quick it was. And he would spend it on all kinds of different things, but it was this almost sense of urgency. There was some mismanagement involved. His business and his personal finances were deeply intertwined. He owed a lot of money to the IRS, and he was going deeper and deeper in debt every month. And so we started to unpack, where might this be coming from? And he shared about a story when he was young and his dad was instilling to him, again, hard work, right? That was something that his dad always instilled to him, hard work. It drove his entrepreneurial spirit, so to speak, right? He's, I'm not going to work for anyone. I'm going to work for myself, and I'm going to build something, and I'm going to create something great. And so his dad said, hey, son, go mow the lawn and I'm going to give you $20. I said, okay, Dad. So he goes, he mows the lawn, comes inside. He did a great job. He's really proud of himself. All right, Dad, I mowed the lawn, like holding out his hand, ready for the cash. And Dad hands him a 10. And he's looking at the 10, he's looking at his dad. He's like, what's this about, Dad? And he goes, well, you used my lawnmower, and that was a $10 fee. Here's $10 for you. So Dad was obviously trying to teach him some sort of lesson. But the lesson that he learned, the lesson that he got was that the money that's given to me is not always promised, right? I'm not always going to get the money that's promised to me. And so I need to spend it before someone else can take it from me. And this is a place that he was operating from because of some different things that were instilled in childhood, right? And so this lesson kind of repeated again and again that what's promised to me may not actually be what comes to me.
Yeah. That's good. That's really good. Yeah. It's just, again, it's such a powerful motivator that if you don't understand that that's what's happening in the background, you may be giving great advice, but it's just completely missing the target. Going back to what you said last episode is, the idea that the more you talk, the less they actually listen and the less they learn. That's why we're going to talk about asking good questions here in a little while, but it's so important to understand that this is not about money, that money is a factor in it, but there's so many other hurdles that we as coaches need to overcome before we get to that part of it. That part of it is, the way I think about it in a physical sense, I think coaching is like climbing a mountain. The hard part is climbing to the top, and that's getting people to understand where they're coming from, what their motivation is, to be open to go through the process and really dig into the psychological, emotional, all those things that are keeping them in that state. And then once you get through that, once you get to the top of the mountain, the rest of it, you just slide right down because the other stuff's fun. Because now you have somebody who's motivated, somebody who's excited. They're coming to you with ideas of how they're going to save money, how they're going to earn more money. And that's the fun part. And we all want to do that part because that's the easy part.
That's right.
The hard part is the ones, the things we're talking about. So do you have an example, or can we dig into the values and beliefs a little bit? I think that's a strong one that I think we need to address.
Absolutely. One comes to mind. I'll share it. And if this isn't quite where you wanted me to go, I'll think of another one. How about that?
Okay. Sounds good.
The first one that comes to mind actually hits on a few different things: generation, values, and culture. I had a client once, super sweet woman, loved the Lord dearly. She had taken all kinds of financial classes, and yet it still wasn't sticking, which to me is a good indicator. All right, there's something deeper going on. Let's get out our shovels and dig a little bit, right?
Right.
This woman, she was raised in the 60s in a very small town. And she went to a very conservative church. She loved her church, a great church family. But throughout her generation, the town she was raised in, and her church atmosphere, there was this instilled belief and instilled value that women stay home and men earn money. So there was this view very early on for her that you don't need to worry about money. That's what your husband's going to do. You don't got to worry about it. He's going to take care of you. And this is what, as a female, this is what your role is in this family dynamic, right? Well, she's now in her 60s and is single, and that husband never came, right? No kids. And she's now, she doesn't realize it until we're coaching together, but she's mad at God. She's really mad at God. And she says things like, I was never supposed to do this alone. Everyone told me I would have someone here to help me. I haven't paid attention to my money because I always assumed that at any moment, this guy's going to walk through the door and save me, right? Like this wasn't supposed to be my role, right? And so she's had to struggle with this. Again, it was somewhat of a generational felt belief, right? It also was instilled just in her church family and in her culture. Not necessarily a bad thing, right? What we're talking about isn't necessarily bad, the things that they were sharing, but the way that she interpreted it and the way that she digested it, per se, was essentially, there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough to be a wife. I'm not good enough to have this helper. And so she started to spend her money almost out of resentment. Does that make sense? I know she's the sweetest lady, and she wasn't necessarily connecting these two things until we really, like I said, got down to the nitty gritty of it all. And she has a huge heart for the Lord. She wants to serve him well, but she was holding this piece, this husband, as an idol, right? That was the idol of, well, I don't need to be diligent with my money. I don't need to be a good steward. I'm going to get this husband, and that's his job, and he'll clean up my mess for me. Thank you, Lord. Right? Yeah. And until then, I'm going to keep spending until there's no tomorrow. So that's one piece when I think about the beliefs, culture, values, generation, how those three things kind of intertwined for her and how they played out. Now, once we realized that, once we were able to make this pretty unconscious belief come to the forefront of her mind, she was able to completely give it over to God, and she's completely changed, right? And she's doing fabulous now. But it wasn't until she really started to understand, like, no, actually, I'm angry. I'm operating out of this place of resentment, and I need to just give that over to the Lord.
Yeah, we just don't, in a situation that you're describing, you just don't know how deep that issue is. But it's so far removed from the actual transaction itself. The transaction is just a symptom of a much, much deeper root issue, right? And that's
exactly.
Any others that you want to cover before we move on to talking about how you get to the root causes of these financial problems?
Let me try to think of a good one for you. Would you like another values-based one, or is there something else?
Yeah, maybe the one about the generation you're born in. If you have an example for that, I think that might help our audience to kind of understand, because I never really honestly thought about that. I recognize that there are people that were born in different generations, so I do see the distinct difference between, let's say, my generation, my parents' generation, my children's generation. There are certainly different values or different ways that we look at things depending on when we were born. But you made a distinction that depending on when you were born in that generation, it was economic boom or economic bust, that made a difference. So can you dig into that a bit?
Yeah, there's a few different ones that I've seen play out. And again, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't say that I've ever traced back, okay, tell me what year you're born. Let's see what was happening during this moment in history. Sure. But I've seen a couple different things play out in this sense. One of them being, again, just paying attention to patterns, right? So even though I started my practice in my 20s, a lot of people are kind of surprised to find that I work with people who are normally about twice my age. So I work with quite a few people in their 50s and 60s. And I notice that they think about work and they think about money very differently than if I'm coaching someone in their 20s or 30s. And so it is this generational, kind of shared experience that people have. So people in the older generations, I have noticed, value work in a much different way, right? They tend to be a little bit more stubborn, I might say. I'm generalizing. Don't shoot me. But they might be a little bit more stubborn in this sense of, this is kind of how I've always done it, and this is how it's been. Not necessarily as open to flexing, where they feel very rooted in a very specific system, where they get a lot of their security and their identity through their work, right?
Yes, I resemble that.
Yeah.
Since I am a Gen Xer, that's definitely part of my generation for sure.
Yes. Where the younger folks, if I'm talking to someone in their 20s or their 30s, things seem a bit more fluid and not as concrete. And I don't necessarily mean that one is good and one is bad. When I talk to someone who's younger and I'm asking them, what's the purpose of money and what's the purpose of this and that, they don't feel like they have a lot of clear answers a lot of time. Where maybe today I'm going to give you this answer, but if you talk to me 2 weeks from now, I'm going to give you a completely different answer. So it feels a bit more fluid, where they don't have that rock solid, this is what I'm putting my stake in. These are the principles that I've been brought up on, and it's not going to change. It changes a bit more frequently. And with the younger folks, I've noticed even more of a pressure to keep up with society, and especially with social media and all these different things. So they just do a lot more comparison with their peers and do more where the older generations might get more value from their work. The younger generations get more value from their experiences, where they can go, what they can do. But then also, what does their lifestyle look like?
This episode of the Stewardship Leader podcast is sponsored by Martis Solutions. Martis helps ministries bridge the gap between their mission and finances through collaborative budgeting. We integrate with your existing ERP or accounting system to provide real-time data and actionable insights so you can focus on what matters most, answering the call to serve. We've helped over 200 faith-based organizations transform their financial planning process and cut their budgeting time by 50% over traditional spreadsheets. With Martis, you'll be able to budget faster, report easier, and collaborate better. Engage your entire organization and empower leadership with a budgeting process that is easy to use, accessible anytime, and offers flexibility for your ministry's unique needs. To learn more about us, check us out at martissolutions.com.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, it's interesting as you were talking, I was thinking about the other aspects of these psychological factors that culturally, obviously that's a strong impulse for both generations you're discussing, but also their personal experience, right? How they experience, especially as they step out on their own, their college experience, their first job, all of that plays into what makes them who they are. And when they come into your office or wherever you're sitting down to work with them, that's what you have to figure out. That's the thing you don't know that you need to unearth. So let's dig into that. How do you psychologically get to the root causes of these financial problems?
Yes, that's a great question. And I by no means can say that I'm the expert in psychology, but I have figured out some key pieces that seem to really help. And one of them I'll explain real quickly. So if we're talking about like the root system, right? So when we think about a tree, I love a tree analogy. I think it's very churchy to use a tree analogy, right? They're all throughout scripture. Yes. Yep. So if we think about the tree, right, we're envisioning this, where people normally look for the problem is the fruit, right? Mm-hmm. We examine the fruit of the tree and that tells us if the tree's healthy or not, right? Where we need to go then, if the tree isn't producing healthy fruit, we need to go right down to the bottom, which is the roots. Okay. The roots in psychology is what I equate to how people think about the world. Okay. So our mindset, how people think about the world will then influence how they see the world. How they see the world then impacts the actions they take, which then gives them a result.
Right.
Okay. Right. So their thinking affects how they see, which affects their actions, which produces a result. So most people, most beginner coaches are tempted to look at the actions and results. You're getting this result, let's change your action. When in reality, we need to go all the way to the bottom of the tree and look at, no, it's their thinking that we need to start to uncover. And so I like to use the example of, have you ever started to research cars, right? You need to buy a new car for your family. You go online, you do all this research to figure out, which one you think is going to be the best deal and the safest and yada, yada, yada. And then as soon as you make that decision of like, okay, this is going to be the best car for my family, well, then all of a sudden I start seeing that car wherever I go, don't I?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because you're paying attention to it now. It's the same thing with our money mindset. So we have to evaluate what's at the root of the tree that's producing the fruit. A common thing that I'll share with pastors is if someone's struggling with generosity, for example, they're looking at the actions and results. If someone's struggling with generosity, it's not because of their actions. It's because they have a core belief that is hindering them from becoming generous. Mm-hmm. That's really where it starts.
Yep.
So how do we start to uncover these things? I will usually start with a money history assignment for my clients. And I'm happy to, share some resources with your folks if anyone inquires. I didn't create it, I don't think. I'm sure I stole it from someone else who gave it to me. But I'm happy to share it. Essentially, it talks about all these different questions. And some of the first ones, we talked on them earlier, really blanket, what was money like for you growing up? Did you feel financially safe? Did you ever feel financially judged? Tell me some of your core memories around money, because all kinds of things will start coming up, right? And then you just start looking for patterns. My favorite question, this is like my bread and butter question right here. So I will share it because I'm a generous person. No, I kid. The question that I like to start off, normally in session 1, I will say, describe your relationship with money using 3 words or 3 phrases. And then you just be quiet. And you let them think about it. Because normally people don't have that answer just off the top of their head. They really have to stop and think about it, which I challenge them to not overthink, give me your gut reaction, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll hear answers all across the board, but normally that will give me some key indicators to those root beliefs. Okay, so I did this exercise just this week, actually, with a new client. And some of the answers that were shared were things like scarcity. Okay, I always feel like I'm scrambling. Makes me feel inadequate. Things like that. Okay, that's starting to help me understand where this person's coming from. And then we can start to work backwards. So, Leo, if you shared with me, okay, Courtney, money makes me feel inadequate, then I might start to work backwards to say, all right, tell me, has that always been the case? Or did something happen that made you start to feel inadequate? What was money like for you growing up? Did you see mom or dad operating from a similar place, right? You don't have to be a rocket scientist normally to start drawing some of these connections for people, right?
Pull on the thread, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
But it's just something that most people don't give a ton of attention to, and they haven't really sat and thought about before. So as soon as we start engaging in this conversation, they can start to draw some connections and then decide, okay, do I still need to come from that place? Is this serving me? Or can I surrender this over to God and instill a new, healthier, Christ-centered money mindset?
Yeah, I can definitely see the power in starting with those kinds of questions. As I think about all the coaching that I've done, usually the conversation that they want to have is to tell you what their problems are. They're really talking about their symptoms, right? It's the results you talked about. Mm-hmm. And some of them may be a little bit further down the road or maybe more aware. They say, it's because I did this and I did that. But rarely, if ever, will they say, I have this belief about money, and therefore that leads me to say this or do this, and then this is why I'm where I'm at. They're just not that astute. They just haven't had that revelation. You shared your story about your early clients. I had similar. They didn't come to the second meeting for a reason because they didn't want my plan. They didn't come for me to create a budget for them or tell them that they can't afford their house or can't afford their car. People just, for some reason, they don't want to hear that. I don't know why, but they don't. But that's, and so what we're talking about is me telling them your behavior is wrong. You made a decision to buy a house. That's too much. And so you need to give it up. That sounds simple. Well, my first client was a couple who I said that to. I literally said, look at the numbers. You're in a house you can't afford. What I didn't know, what I found out later from the wife, is that because he was a minister and they had lived in like a parsonage, but it was a somewhat unsafe area. They had a couple kids and he had made this vow, like, I will never put my family in that situation. I didn't know that. So he made an emotional decision that was tied to something that was a deep, deep belief. I want to keep my family safe. And it's not that was the only option they had. Of course, he could have put him into a nice apartment that was way less than their house. But in his mind, it's like, no way, I'm not going there. A house is the only thing I can have for my family. And the sad part is, like, years later, one of the pastors came and said, hey, I've got this couple that I want you to meet with. And it turns out to be the same couple. And they were deeper in debt, twice as much as they were before, and in a much, much deeper situation. Where I failed them is that I didn't recognize that this was not a financial issue, that this was a psychological, emotional, values-driven, personal experience-driven decision that was leading them to manage their money that way. And unfortunately, my lack of training, my lack of experience caused me to give them the wrong advice. So, Courtney, I so appreciate you sharing this with us because we all want to serve people really well. And when we focus on the wrong things, it's not that we're giving wrong information. We're just not helping them to really see the motivation and to see the reason behind their spending and really buy into it so that then we can give them the resources to succeed. So, all right. So let's talk about some other good questions that you might ask a client in the conversation. The ones you shared are great, but what other questions would you recommend we use when we're coaching so that it draws this out and helps them see their beliefs and the deeper roots?
Yeah, I might even, as you were sharing that, some things that were coming to mind. Because, yeah, again, I've been there. I feel bad for all of our first clients because they, we probably owe them money or something. I don't know. But we're going to make mistakes if we can get ahead of them, though, right? If we can really help people and come from this place of, they might say that they're coming to us because they want financial help or because they need a plan or they want to learn how to budget or whatever it might be. But what we can do as a coach and serving them really well is actually helping them to figure out what's behind that driving motivation. So potentially a great way to set this up for whether you're a leader in the church or if you're a financial coach, whatever it might be, if you have someone coming to you that says, hey, I have this financial pain point, I would love your help. It's helping them to unpack like what's actually driving the desire to want help. So a few questions that I'll ask maybe in the consultation, which even if you're doing this as a ministry, I highly recommend having a consultation at the beginning, again, to get their buy-in, right? Like make sure that it's a good fit with them and the coach. So some of the questions that I'll ask is, why now? Right? Like this has maybe been an issue for decades. Like why is now the right time for you to get ahead of this and start to unpack that? If they say, well, I really just want to learn how to budget, that's really what I need to do. I might ask again, like, what other things have you tried? Have you Googled it? have you watched YouTube videos? Have you printed out a form or tried an app or what else have you tried? Just to see again where their mindset's at. And then I'll ask simple questions as far as, okay, let's say we give you a budget and you're sticking to it and you're following it and life is going well. Like, what's going to be true about you then that's not true about you right now? That's a question that I'll ask a lot in a lot of different, it works in a lot of different scenarios. If I can take a little sidebar, in our last conversation, we mentioned that not only people with financial or money problems, I'll say, the ones living paycheck to paycheck or have a lot of debt are the ones who need coaches. It's the ones with wealth too. I once had a client call me and he said, Courtney, my wife and I, we just became millionaires. We finally did it. This was the thing that they had spent like their whole life working towards. This was the big moment for him. He's a Christ follower. And I said, that's great. I'm so excited for you. I'm glad that you're happy in this moment. Look, all right, so tell me, today you're a millionaire. Yesterday you weren't. What's true about you today that wasn't true about you yesterday? And without skipping a beat, he said, I now have more stress because I have more to lose.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So
it's good that he was aware of that. That's actually really, really good.
It was good that he was aware of it. And again, it just leads us into everyone can benefit from coaching, not just the people who are in lack, right? But even the people in abundance. So going back to that initial consultation, just asking really good questions to try to get underneath what's actually the motivation. What are you truly trying to get out of this that you couldn't go get somewhere else? And sometimes I'll ask it pretty straightforward like that, right? Like, what do you need me for? Like, tell me a bit more, right? Like, let's unpack it a bit. And I remember there's this one couple, I had known the wife for quite a while, and she knew what I did. And again, they had a good bit of wealth, but they had never budgeted or planned for their money in any kind of way. They never talked about their money. And so reluctantly, she brings her husband to the table, right? And we're all talking. He doesn't really want to be there, but he's engaging for the sake of his wife. And we're sharing, okay, you want to learn how to budget. Tell me more. Tell me why. How is this going to make life any better, any different? Because again, the budget isn't really the thing, right? Like, let's not make the budget the goal or the idol, right? It's because it's not. I say a budget's only a helpful tool if it brings people closer to Christ. But I'll never forget pretty much that whole conversation. They're saying like, we want to learn how to budget. And I'm basically saying, no, you don't. You want something else. What is it? And she finally looks at her husband and she goes, you know what I really want? I want us to talk again. I want us to have a better marriage. I want us to actually dream about our future together and have a plan together. That's what I want. And so these are some of the things that you can use going into, again, setting that stage and setting the tone. Let's not make it about math and numbers, but let's figure out what's really underneath, what's driving them to come to you and ask for help, raise their hand, because that is a huge deal. And then how do we serve them really well is not by just jumping right to the numbers and the budget, but let's go a bit deeper and challenging them a bit to say, why now? What's going on in your life? Maybe they're going through something that they could talk about. Or tell me more. What's going to be true about you once you reach X goal that's not true about you now? What are you going to be able to get? What are you hoping results from all of this? And going a bit deeper.
Yeah, that's great. It's great. So appreciate you sharing some of those key questions. And I'm sure there's more. And I think that's what I like about coaching is that it's not something you can master really. It's something that you continue as you grow. And hopefully we don't do this out of our own strength, that we're led by the Spirit of God to know and to have that discernment. And this is where the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, can bring the wisdom and the discernment that we need in the moment, right? The discernment of spirits and things that are happening that we may not be aware of. And so how I want to kind of land this episode is to say, we have to be vulnerable enough as coaches to step out and say, God, I know that I do not understand what's happening in this person's life. I'm also aware, very aware, that there's nothing that I really can do to transform them and change their lives. Like, I don't have that power. I can't. I may give them practical knowledge. I may introduce them to tools that'll help them to do it. But at the end of the day, like you said, the goal isn't a budget unless it's to draw them closer to Christ. That's why I love a budget, is because it reveals things, right? One of the exercises that we do in our coaching program, our group coaching, is tracking expenses. And the beauty of that is that it's just very revealing. It reveals beliefs. It reveals our biases, our desires, our wants, all of those things. Now, armed with that information, we can say, well, why do I spend money here? Why do I feel like this is a need when obviously it's not? I can live without it. But I framed it in my mind that I need this. And so it's dealing with those things because it helps us to then get rid of the barriers that don't allow us to really see what we're relying on, which is money or experiences on those things. And we take those substitutes instead of leaning on the only one that can really sustain us, the only one that could really give us joy and happiness and fulfillment, and that's our relationship in Christ. And so it is very much about that. And so I just love the way you bring that into the conversation, is that you don't lead with, well, tell me where your mess is and let me see if I can figure out some practical ways to help you out of it. But to say, why me? I mean, you've done other things. Why are you choosing me now? I just think it's very important to understand the motivation. And again, going back to the beliefs and the values that lead then to recognize their behavior and then why their outcomes are, not just focus on the outcomes or the results. And those usually don't lead very deep. And I think this is why people leave, honestly. When we focus on the outcomes or just the behavior, we short circuit the whole process and people don't really get to understand what this is really about. And that's a shame, because like you said, and I said, we've made those mistakes, especially early on in our coaching careers, of just trying to be a fixer. And I just want to encourage everyone that's listening, if you've done coaching, if this is something that God is leading you and have a passion for, what Courtney said is so true. This is really not a ministry about getting people on a budget. We hope that will be a tool they'll use, but really it's about drawing them closer to God and having them be a true Christ follower. There's no better way to serve and love people than to introduce them to the one that has all the answers. And I think it's such a valuable ministry within our churches. So thank you, Courtney. Thank you for your wisdom today, for sharing both your wins and your fails, because you've learned through those. And that's a typical mark of someone that is not only willing to offer help, but also always seeking to grow in their own knowledge and their own wisdom in this area. So I appreciate you for that. Thank you for everything you shared today.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like we could do a whole nother series just on my failures, but I appreciate it so much. And I think what you said at the end there, Leo, is so important to just capture one more time, is we're really relying, when we're going into these counseling or coaching sessions, we're relying on the Holy Spirit and we're relying on God, because it's nothing that you and I can do. It's purely God, and we might be the vessel, we might be the thing that he's using, but just prayer that a coach can pray right before that session is just, God, show me where you're already leading this person, where you're already moving in their life. How can I just encourage them to keep going in obedience and walking by faith?
Yeah, that's a really good, an important aspect of anything that we do is to always invite the Holy Spirit, to always be praying without ceasing and seeking the Lord to make those connections that we just can't. It's not within our private ability, but he can. And that's why he's got us involved in this, is because God does need us to be the physical person in front of these individuals to speak through and to guide. I don't know that I've ever been in a coaching situation where I trusted the Lord and felt inadequate for the situation. But there has been times, especially early on, where I felt I didn't have the knowledge to give those people and felt inadequate because I was trying to do it out of my own strength. And I think that's a good indicator to say, hey, if I feel I can't help these people, then it's important to say, yes, I can't. It's not my job. It's my job to connect them to the heart of God and help them, have that revelation that God wants them to have. And that's the privilege we have. But I so appreciate everything you shared, because we do have to be aware. We have to be equipped to be able to walk them through that process. That does take some knowledge and some training and some concepts, and everything we talked about in the last 2 episodes is understanding that is part of our training, that we need to be equipped and ready. But ultimately, the Lord does the work.
Amen.
All right. Well, Courtney, again, thank you for being on the podcast. We have one more to do. We're going to dig into the money script in marriage. Obviously, we can't talk about money without addressing the relational side of it. And of course, in a marriage, we know how finances can be a point of drawing people together and helping them work together, or actually split them apart. So we want to talk about how do we do that within the confound of coaching and that experience, so that we can help couples really experience everything God wants for them. And to manage money really together is such a huge benefit. So I can't wait for that conversation. Courtney, any last words before we close? And while you do that, also let people know how they can connect with you and learn more about what you're doing.
Absolutely. I know we're probably throwing a lot at people, and I hope that they're just picking up on a few little nuggets that can really help just enhance their current coaching or their current stewardship ministry. Remember, all we're really doing is just drawing people closer to Christ through money conversations. Keep it simple. It's okay. I like what you expressed towards the end of just going very humble, recognizing I know nothing about you, and I know nothing about your situation. But how can I help? Let's just learn, and go in with a lot of curiosity, right?
Yeah.
That's normally where I check my heart. I think it's easy to start to get jaded or judgmental when you're looking at someone's numbers ahead of time, to the point where I've had them just stop submitting numbers ahead of time. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. But if you're going into a session and you already kind of feel like you got this person figured out, or you know exactly what they ought to be doing, stop, check your heart, lean in with curiosity, and just ask the Holy Spirit to guide you in that conversation to see what's actually going on, because the numbers are really just showing that there's something much deeper. If anyone listening is hopefully finding what I have to say helpful, and they want some more encouragement leaning in with their own church, become a big advocate for financial discipleship within churches. And I want to help other churches kind of with this catalyst, so to speak. So I do sermons and workshops. I've created all kinds of tools like Bible studies and online courses. And I even have a network of coaches who partner with me, so that when a church perhaps wants to utilize coaching, but they don't have the systems built out yet, or they don't have all the volunteers, or, maybe they feel funny about charging, but think people should pay for it, whatever it is, they can connect with Markley Coaching Group. And we're happy to help assist with all of those things. Because again, at the end of the day, it's just about bringing people closer to the heart of God. And I'm happy to step into that conversation. So you can learn more at markleycoachinggroup.com, or email me at courtney@markleycoachinggroup.com. Again, very long title, similar to yourself, Leo.
Well, thank you. We'll also add a link to Courtney's website and her email in our show notes. So if you didn't remember that or jot it down, just go to our show notes and you'll find it there. Well, again, thank you, Courtney. I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Leo.
And I want to thank you, the listener, for being part of the last. Hopefully, you've listened to both of the last podcasts. But if you haven't, we do encourage you to go listen to the first one, where we really kind of lay a foundation for why coaching is important, why have a coaching and discipleship ministry in the area of money in your church or as a practice. We think it's a vital, vital tool today to draw people closer to God, to connect their faith and their finances. And we hope that you will benefit from both of those. And also, we're going to do one more. Again, Money Script is coming up next, so be looking for that. And thank you again. And we do hope that it was valuable to you. And if it was, would you do us a huge favor? Just share it with someone. Maybe even leave us a review. If you like what we're doing, the content we're doing, we would love for you to do that, simply because it makes other people aware that we exist. And this content can also be shared with other churches and other leaders. And hopefully they will find it valuable as well. If you want to know more about what we do here at Christian Stewardship Network, you can go to christianstewardshipnetwork.com. We have content, we have events that we do. We do in-person events, we do workshops, we have courses, and we have a membership that really comes along, and it's really best for a church leader that wants to have resources and access to a community that will help them to really understand this stewardship and generosity ministry more holistically. There's a lot to this ministry, a lot that is available to you. If you're just starting out, if you're just learning about it, we've done a lot of the work for you. We'd love to share it with you. We'd like to be in your corner, supporting you as you're building that out, and just be a resource to you. That's really our heart, is that we would be able to help you with the things that we've learned and really help you to get started on a solid foundation as you do this, because we think it's necessary. We think it's biblical, and we think your people will benefit and God will be honored through it. Again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Stewardship Leader.